Hello, my name is Phoebe Wilby. Today I'm going to read you a story from my short story collection, Time is of the Essence. The story I'm going to read to you today is called A Modern Fairy Tale. All fairy stories begin with the words, once upon a time. And so we must begin. Once upon a time there lived a princess. She was not an ordinary princess, and she did not live in an ordinary castle with servants to do her every bidding. And although her daddy was a king, he had died a very long time ago, and her mummy, the queen, lived in another kingdom far, far away on the other side of the world. Now our princess lived in a small house, in a small market town, in a small county of a small country, which was once part of a huge and powerful empire, but which now governed only a very small portion of a much larger world. On the outskirts of the small market town was a large expanse of land locals called the moors, and it was here the princess would go when her less than regal life took a not unexpected turn for the worse. It was where she would pour out her soul to the trees, flowers, and all tiny creatures, and although she never pretended to hear answers to her heartfelt cries, her time on the moors always left her with a feeling of peace and the strength to keep going. In a bigger town, not far from the small market town where the princess lived, there lived a handsome prince. Now, as you may guess, he was no ordinary handsome prince. Although a native of this small has-been empire, he was removed from his home at a young age, and only recently, after many, many good and bad experiences, had made his way back, not to his hometown, which was an icy palace somewhere up north, but to a balmy seaside naval town on the south coast. High on a peak on the outskirts of the moor stood what locals assumed was an old ruined chapel, and indeed it was, until the sun set in the west and the stars struggled to shine through the perpetual mist. Then it was transformed and became the High Council, seat of the fairy folk. Tonight was special. The air was particularly crisp and scented with wildflowers. Blossoms from the meadows below caught the currants and rose, dancing with delight to shower down upon the assembly. The fairy folk were out in their finery, gossamer silk gowns, spider silk tights, and blossom shoes. All in the natural shades of autumn adorned the girls, while the menfolk dressed in the more robust tunics woven from fresh foliage. Their wings, both male and female, glittered with 1,000 dewdrop gems, and the women had intertwined blossoms and foliage through their hair. They were a glorious sight, and tonight they would crown their new king and queen. Tallulah stood back from the assembly, watching and feeling the joy that everyone there basked in. Pity I can't join in, she thought, and her sigh was heavy. She had been given a task, a very special task, but so far, try as she might, she had failed. Somehow she'd had to entice Prince Roderick to seek out Princess Annabel, fall in love with her, and have her fall in love with him, and then he had to ask her to marry him. It was simple. Also, she thought, when she had accepted her assignment during the final snowfall of the previous winter, the catch was, it all had to be done by tonight. Somehow she had managed to get him to fall in love with her, but, well, Princess Annabel didn't know he even existed, and Prince Roderick was just too shy to introduce himself. Annabel was going to the ball. It wasn't really a ball, just a dance to celebrate St. Valentine's Day, albeit 3 weeks later. She didn't have anyone to go with. There was no longer a man in her life, and her best friend and chief handmaid who had planned on going with her was very ill. Although Annabel felt she should have been by her side, nursing her back to health, Charity had insisted she go. Have fun, she told her. Lord knows you could do with it after all you've been through. Really? One eyebrow lifted as Annabel looked at her friend over the top of the spectacles she wore for reading. I'd rather curl up in front of the fire with a good book and a bar of chocolate. No glitzy St. Valentine's dance will ever top that for entertainment. Charity took a momentary sidestep from living up to her name and scoffed. You'll never find yourself a prince with that lousy attitude. Maybe not, but at least I won't look desperate. Charity laughed. Not desperate, no, but you do look pathetic. Thanks. You're welcome. Now trot off to Asda and find yourself a ball gown. It was after 8 o'clock by the time she found something suitable to wear, and having nowhere handy to change, she managed to do it all in the front seat of her car. The gold top, black trousers, and chunky jewellery didn't quite make her feel in a party mood, but it was certainly better than the scrubs she had been wearing. A quick touch-up to her eyeliner and mascara, a flick of a brush through her luscious locks, and she was ready to paint the town sultry. She rocked up at the car park to the church hall just as Roderick climbed out of his chariot. "Well, hello," he said. "Good timing." He grinned down at her. "Oh, well, yeah, I guess so." "Mind if I join you?" No, not at all." They entered the hall together. Above them, hiding behind the glow of the street lamp, Tallulah watched. As the door swung closed, she flitted inside, heart pounding. Fairy folk didn't usually enter the places frequented by their giant earthbound cousins, but she was anxious to see how this evening would pan out. A quick scan of the room revealed the perfect hiding place. Red and silver tinsel streamers adorned the room, lowering the hall ceiling by a good 4 or 5 feet. The room doubled as a sports hall, and the basketball hoops had been given the same treatment, and a huge red and silver heart balloon hung from each of them. Tallulah perched on a hoop, hiding behind the fronds of tinsel. Annabel walked a little self-consciously beside the much taller Roderick. She knew who he was, of course. Recently divorced, handsome Madonna of a man, tall, slim, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a hint of a beard. Just her type, really, except for the stories she'd heard. Still, he intrigued her. A friend came up to her. "He's here," she whispered. "Really?" she shrugged. "Doesn't matter." She glanced at Roderick, who didn't appear to have heard the exchange. "Let's go this way," she said, gesturing toward the corridor that would take them to the other side of the hall and make their entrance less grand. He fell into step beside her, and they entered the hall through the kitchen. "Would you like a drink?" "Yes, please." He handed her a plastic cup with some squash. It was gone in an instant. She smiled up at him. "I was thirsty." "Indeed. Shall we dance?" He led her to the dance floor. Some modern pop was playing, and they just moved to the music, not touching, not speaking. It would have been impossible to hear anyway. She glanced up and saw her ex looking her way. He was with his new wife, so why did he look like he wanted to be with her? She shook her head and turned away. A slow song was playing. Awkward. Roderick held out his hand. "Shall we?" She moved closer and was shocked by the warmth she felt as his arms encircled her, stiffening slightly, then relaxing as the shock gave way to comfort. She rested her head on his chest and felt him rest his head gently on her hair. "Your hair smells gorgeous," he whispered. "Thank you," she said, breathing in the glorious manly smell of his aftershave and cologne, and she melted a little more into his arms. The song ended and they drifted apart. "I just need to use the..." She gestured towards the door. "I'll wait here." She nodded and made her escape. Once inside, she leaned against the tiled wall, allowing the coldness to seep through her clothes to cool her down. "Roderick seems to be stuck like glue to you tonight." Crystal's soft voice broke into her reverie. She shrugged. "I don't mind. He's harmless." "That's not what..." "I know, but what else would you expect an ex-wife to say?" "You're an ex-wife." "Yep, and that's why I won't talk to her. I don't want to accidentally say something I shouldn't." "Must get back." Crystal nodded. "As long as you're okay." "I will be." She smiled. "I am." She returned to the dance hall where Roderick handed her another drink. "Thank you." She smiled again. "You're very thoughtful." "You sound like you didn't expect that." "Oh, it's not that. Let's just say it's refreshing." He smiled as the DJ invited everyone up for the Virginia reel. "Shall we?" "Why not?" He led her to the dance floor, and they joined in the mayhem that was the Virginia reel, spinning wildly when it was their turn to dance up the middle. They were both breathless when it was over. "That was so much fun," she breathed. They danced a bit more, and eventually the evening was winding up. "I wasn't going to come, but thank you for such a great evening." It sounded so formal and stiff, but Annabel didn't know how else to say it. "It was my pleasure." His eyes twinkled as he looked into hers, and she found herself swimming in the cool blue ocean. He walked her out to her car, arm draped loosely across her shoulders. "We'll have to do this again." "But it's a year until next Valentine's dance." She looked up at him through her lashes. "You could maybe come for tea sometime." "I'd like that." He saw her into her car and watched as she pulled out of the parking lot. "I failed my task," Tallulah flew toward Princess Annabel's retreating car in a panic. She stopped mid-flight and turned herself about. Sure, she could go after the princess, but where was she likely to be heading after her evening? Not home. Not yet. There was a place she always went when she wanted to talk things over, and Tallulah knew just where she would be going. She darted back to the prince. "Prince Roderick," she whispered, flying just out of his line of sight close to his ear. "You don't want to go home yet. Follow Princess Annabel. She may need your help." Roderick swiped an insect buzzing around his ear, and the buzzing stopped. He sighed. "I was so close," he muttered. "Maybe if I follow her home we can continue this, whatever this is." He leapt into his car, revved the engine, and sped off after her. Tallulah picked herself up off the ground where Prince Roderick had inadvertently swiped her and, snapping her fingers, reappeared inside his car. She'd have to be a little more careful now. He didn't know his own strength. Roderick followed the route to Annabel's and was about to turn off the highway onto the road that would take him to her village when he noticed that a car very much like Annabel's was still on the road ahead. Intrigued, he decided to follow to see if indeed it was her. It was easy enough to do this unseen while they were still on the main road, but as she headed further out of town, turning left and right onto progressively smaller and less travelled roads, Roderick began to worry that she may have noticed she was being followed. It was a needless worry. Annabel was too caught up in her own thoughts to notice the little sporty car following her. When she finally reached her destination, she pulled into the car park and sat for a while, head on the steering wheel, trying to collect her thoughts. "It's no use," she thought. "I'll just have to go up there tonight, talk it over." She sighed, exited and locked her car, and began to trek up the hill. She didn't see the car parked in darkness, and didn't recognize the sporty car that allowed her to cross the road to the gate. She was halfway up the hill when she heard it, a laboured breathing even louder than her own. "Annabel!" The voice was harsh, dreadful. Her ex, Brandon. "Are you following me?" She stopped and turned, angry that he was about to ruin her special place. "You know it's not safe out here. I worry about you." "You gave up the right to worry about me when we divorced." A slap in the face that glanced off unfelt. "I'll always worry about you." "There's no need." "I only ever wanted a happy marriage." "You've got that, haven't you?" "You know what I meant, with you." "But you're not with me. You have her. Go home." He was coming closer. He should have been going away. "Not until I get what I came for." "Leave me alone." She turned away and started climbing again. His hand on her shoulder stopped her. "You need to listen to me. You need to let me go." He spun her around, trapping her arm behind her back, claiming her lips, harsh, angry, painful. She bit him. He yelped, tightened his grip on the arm he held behind her back, and raised his other arm to slap her. She winced, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the pain. "The lady asked you to leave her alone." Her eyes flew open and she jerked her head towards the sound, accidentally clocking Brandon in the jaw. He cursed. "Who do you think you are?" "You're hurting my friend. I'd suggest you leave her alone now." "Are you going to make me?" "I won't have to." Roderick stared in amazement at the spectre coming towards them from the chapel on the hill. "Do you think I was born yesterday? I'm not falling for that." "What?" "You, looking behind me as if there's something there." "Suit yourself." Roderick beckoned to the spectre. "He's all yours." Brandon yelped again as a cold, metallic blade rested on his exposed neck. He dropped Annabel's arm and slowly turned around. He could see nothing, but the feeling of the cold steel was still there. A warmth trickled down his neck. He wiped his hand across his neck and came away with blood. His. "What the—" "I think you should leave." "You'll pay for this. I'm calling the cops." Roderick shrugged. "Be my guest." Brandon ran off in terror, and the spectre disappeared. Annabel turned towards the chapel on the hill. "What was it? I saw nothing." "It looked like a knight, but glowed." Roderick shrugged again. "It doesn't matter. You're safe now." "Did you follow me?" "I just felt I had to." I'm glad you did." Annabel looked down at her feet and shivered as Roderick's hand lifted her chin. Their eyes met, and once again Annabel found herself swimming. Gently, Roderick claimed her, soothing away the pain, holding her close to his heart. "I think I love you," she whispered. "I know I love you," he whispered back. "Come with me." She led him up to the ruined church. "This is my special place. I only invite special people here." "Brandon?" "Never invited. Must have followed me one day. I found this place when I needed to get away from him." "Figures." Tallulah flew ahead, anxious now to join the party. Her work was done. Well, Prince Roderick hadn't asked Princess Annabel to marry him, but they'd both declared their love. It was as good as in the bag. She hoped she hadn't missed the coronation. She glanced down at her woolen tunic and realized she was not dressed for a gala. Is it too late to change? The moon had found a space in the fog, and the pale, silvery light illuminated the damp heather. Perfect, she thought, and with a liberal sprinkling of fairy dust, she had created a heather-purple gown of exquisite design. She borrowed some silvery moonlight and infused it with the drops of mist on a spiderweb to sprinkle on her hair and wings, and then glided down to take her place at the gathering. Is it done? She turned to her inquisitor and nodded. Then where are they? On their way up. Here? Is that wise? Probably not, but this is her special place. It's where I expected her to come after tonight. Lucas shrugged. Guess it won't hurt. They'll not see us anyway. Have the festivities begun yet? Tallulah hoped she hadn't missed anything. Just the preliminaries. He glanced at her. Curious. Guests of honor haven't arrived. Tallulah raised a delicate eyebrow. Really? I'm not late then. Annabel held Roderick's hand and nearly dragged him up the hill. The night air was crisp and seemed charged with electricity. Up here the mist had cleared and the stars twinkled. Roderick saw the isolated lights of the moor homes interspersed with the dark shapes of the moors and tors, glowing faintly through the misty moonlight. I've always loved the moors. These are different to those at my home, but there's still a magic to them. Best shown, words just cannot describe. Annabel smiled. She knew exactly what he meant. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair and she shivered. Cold? Let's see if it's warm inside the ruin. Roderick took her hand this time and led her inside. The moonlight shone through the gaps in the ancient stonework and filtered through the missing tiles of the roof. It was warm inside, but still cold. Their breath created a mist all its own, melding with the moonlight to create ethereal silver threads that swirled around them. There must be some sort of mineral in these walls. Roderick took off his glasses to get a closer look at the tiny sparkling specks. Maybe. Annabel followed him to the wall, ducking under his arm to take advantage of his warmth. I've seen this before, but not every night. Last time was probably about 6 months ago. You come here often, then? Roderick winced. It sounded like a lousy pick-up line. If Annabel thought so, she didn't let on. Not so much nowadays. When Brandon and I were still together, I think I was here more than at home. And yet you're here tonight. She pursed her lips. Yeah, it's my thinking place. She was quiet for a long time, and Roderick thought she may actually want him to leave. She was still tucked under his arm, and he was reluctant to make the suggestion. She sighed. You'll think I'm mad, but usually when I come up here I just talk about, well, everything, really. And then when I come away, well, somehow I can see better. Not physically, that would be daft. I just, well, you know. He squeezed his shoulders. He squeezed her shoulders. You're not daft. He guided her to a ledge and they sat together, silently comfortable with each other's company. Annabel rested her head on his shoulder and he rested his chin on her head. You still smell gorgeous, he whispered. Tallulah enjoyed the music and dancing. Lucas swirled her around. The sparkling silver drops of spiderweb dew left a faint trail. She was lucky to be here, but she was a little put out that the guests of honor still hadn't made their appearance. What's taking so long, she asked. Lucas smiled and spun her around again. Guests of honor keep to their own timetable, he said, giving her a saucy wink. She pouted and made as if to fly away, but Lucas grabbed both her hands and flung her into a double roll, deftly flying after her, ready to catch her when she came out. Do you think I should check on Prince Roderick and Princess Annabel? No need, said Lucas. Look. Tallulah looked. You know, you're nothing like... Annabel felt the fire suffuse her face, and she dropped the hand that she had been about to place on his knee into her own lap, gripping it with the other one. Roderick chuckled. Has my ex-wife been telling tales? Oh, well, she has said a thing or two. I prefer to make up my own mind, though, about people, you know. She lapsed into silence, trying to take a deep, steadying breath without seeming to. What was it about him that affected her so? He shifted a little on the bench and gently took her chin in his hand. Can I tell you a secret? He asked, and she raised her eyes to look at him. She wasn't exactly sure what it was she saw, but he suddenly looked different, somehow more intense and yet powerfully gentle. Of course, he only knew she spoke because he saw her lips move. She stared into his eyes, moonlight reflecting in hers, leaving him breathless. He sighed and felt the pull of the magic, drawing them closer together. Can you feel it? The magic of the moors? It's all around us. Annabel was silent, struggling to maintain her clarity, feeling herself drowning in his essence. I've never felt so strongly about anything before, and I know we've never really been, well, out, but... Roderick dropped to one knee and took her hand in his and said, "Will you marry me?" The silence was deafening as the fairy folk held their collective breaths. All faces turned to face the mortal couple, the Princess Annabel staring into the eyes of the Prince Roderick as he knelt and offered her his heart. Tallulah was particularly agitated, her heart beating so fast she thought it must surely be able to be transcending the veil that separated their worlds. "Say yes," she silently pleaded, unconsciously gripping Lucas's hand so tight his hand felt numb. Slowly as one, the fairy folk exhaled, gliding towards a couple who seemed to be caught in a time trap. Oblivious to their audience, Annabel's thoughts whirled, making her feel dizzy. Am I mad? I'm actually contemplating this. What would Crystal say? What would Charity say? Do I care? I felt something, but is it love? Yes, she whispered, still drowning, but now surrendering to it. She said yes! Tallulah squealed. Grabbing Lucas's hand, she spun him around. Lucas laughed. Slow down, Tallulah. You'll make us both dizzy. I'm sorry, but I did it, she squealed again, quietly this time, and didn't go off in a mad spin, although the grin remained. You certainly did, Tallulah. The bass voice brought her back to reality. Father, she demurely curtsied. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to bring them here, but... He silenced her with an upraised hand. Come. Tallulah's hand slipped out of Lucas's as she followed the old fairy toward the dais above the ledge upon which our mortal hero and heroine sat as they pledged their love. Here, child, sit. He gestured to the golden throne, the seat of honour. But this is for... It's for you, silly, for us. Lucas, who had quietly followed, took his place beside her. I don't understand. Of course you don't, child. I'm old. My time as king is over. And with your mother having already, well, you know. He wiped a tear and straightened his back. It's time. Around them, the ruined chapel exploded with light. Annabel and Roderick rose in amazement at the scene unfolding before their eyes. Tiny winged people flitted around what looked like a golden chandelier above their heads, lit by thousands of tiny candles. At the centre of the chandelier were two exquisite gold seats, thrones, and seated on these thrones were two tiny winged people, no taller than 6 inches each. Both were dressed in the colour of purple heather, the girls' dress sparkling like tiny diamonds in the glow. Thousands of tiny creatures flitted about, sweet music filled the air, silk streamers caught the glow of both the moonlight and candlelight. Princess Annabel and Prince Roderick, announced a curious little fairy, reading from a scroll, and a rather regal fairyman flew down to hover about a foot in front of them. We are honoured you have accepted our invitation. I don't understand. Annabel shook her head, fascinated and perhaps a little afraid of the scene before her. Roderick put a protective arm around her shoulder and gave her a reassuring squeeze. You come here often. Maybe they think... Shh! The regal fairy motioned for them to be seated again as a line of tiny trumpeters announced the start of the ceremony. It was a surprisingly quiet ceremony. Well, 2 ceremonies actually. The first looked remarkably like a wedding. The little bride looked dazed but certainly radiantly happy. The second was a coronation. That's my daughter, the old fairy whispered, and Annabel thought she caught a glimpse of a diamond-like sparkle falling from his eye. He flitted away from them up to the happy couple on the chandelier. He took his daughter's hand, touched his forehead to hers, and then disappeared. Her companion, now husband, copying Roderick's gesture, put his arm across her shoulders and drew him to her. Annabel felt a surge of emotion for this tiny couple, but still had no idea why she was here. Before she could pluck up the courage to ask, the scene faded. Wait! The glow around the chandelier brightened again, and Tallulah and Lucas floated down to hover where her father had been only moments before. I don't understand. The fairy folk clasped their tiny hands over their rather pointed little ears. A flash of pain flitted across their faces. Sorry, Annabel barely breathed the word, and they nodded their appreciation at her consideration. I didn't understand either at first, but now I do. My name is Tallulah. I have been your fairy guide since you started coming here. You were real? I thought I was to speak to myself. Annabel's eyes, already brimming, spilled a single teardrop. Lucas looked horrified. You can't do that here, we'll drown. Annabel gulped and reined in the tears. Sorry. That's okay. We'd be able to contain the flood, although salt water isn't natural in these parts. Tallulah cast a furtive glance at Lucas. She continued, We were so worried for you, and I was given the task of helping you find true happiness. I followed you around a bit and noticed that Prince Roderick, well, had feelings for you. I was given the deadline of tonight. Why tonight? I can answer that, Lucas said. Fairy folk have a king and a queen. There has to be both. Tallulah's mother passed a year ago. The king therefore had a year to either find himself another queen or abdicate the name and name his successor. He has had many queens over the years and has many children. Tallulah is the youngest. Is it the youngest that... Oh, no, Lucas laughed. It is the most worthy, and that is Tallulah. He looked at his bride with such love, Annabel's heart ached a little more. But, said Tallulah, the king can't just name his successor. He has to prove she, or he, is worthy, and so I was given this task. Of course I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. What matters is that I succeeded. Your father, the king, he disappeared, said Roderick. Is he dead? Heavens no. He's just gone to be with my mother. But, shh, we can't explain it. You wouldn't understand. Tallulah looked at a tiny watch on her wrist. We need to rejoin my people, but before we do, you're going to take away our memories, aren't you? Please don't. Annabel's plea tugged at Tallulah's heart. My hands are tied, but I can promise you this. I think we should get you home, Roderick whispered into Annabel's ear. You're chilled through. It was true. She was shivering, but she didn't think it was with the cold. Did she really agree to marry a man she barely knew? With some trepidation, she looked up at Roderick, who still had his arm draped over her shoulders, lending his warmth, comforting her. Yes, she did. And in true fairy tale fashion, they lived happily ever after. I hope you've enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed reading it to you. Time is of the Essence is available directly from the Book Dragon. They're located at 6 West Row, Stockton-on-Tees. That's in the UK. Or you can buy it by visiting their online shop, which is www.thebookdragon.co.uk. Thank you.